What rule was implemented because of you? Story 1. Years ago, I bought a computer from Dell. I paid for it with my debit card and excitedly monitored the build status every day, checking in at work and on my days off, going into the library to check on expected shipping updates. When I made the purchase, it was a 5 to 7 day expectation for delivery. On day 10, when it had gone from order accepted to order prepared to order bill, it suddenly went back to order accepted. Stage 1. I called their customer service line and was told there has been a glitch in the system and the order got expedited, and soon was back at order bill and I was just waiting on shipping confirmation. The next day, back to order accepted again. This happened every day for 5 days. Cue another call to customer service. Apparently there was a problem with payment and they referred me back to my bank because the payment was on hold. Called my credit union and they told me it was just an authorization hold waiting on final confirmation from the merchant. Called Dell back and they saw the same thing. But even the customer service director couldn't say why it hadn't been finalized. But every time the payment didn't finalize, they literally took the box with the computer off the loading dock and sent it back to stage 1 again and again and again. This led to a long hold while the customer service director looked into their billing system and ended up transferring me to a very nice lady in their accounting department. Initially, she thought it was an in-house person from the listing dock asking about a customer's order, but quickly got up to speed. She was covering for a coworker who helped with in-house billing system troubleshooting who was out on vacation and usually just handled tracking accounting from Dell sending parts from one warehouse and factory to another. But she dug in and figured out that the issue was that I was paying with a debit card, not a credit card. Now, debit cards were still relatively new. Most banks capped the amount you could spend per day at $250 to $500. But my credit union was one of the 5 financial institutions that didn't cap it at all. They proudly noted on a monthly statement insert that the credit union felt that it was your money to manage the way you wanted to. However, Dell didn't accept debit cards at the time. Not for a dime, not for the $800 I was trying to spend. The nice lady in accounting, however, had just come back from a conference. I knew there was a push to get more banks to act like my credit union and remove their spending caps. She told me to hang tight and she was going to get it done for me. I told her I could change my payment method to a credit card, but she told me that it would delay the whole process. 2 days later, I got a call from her. She made a presentation to the CEO, CFO, and several VPs making the case that Dell needed to get ahead of the curve and start accepting debit cards with no spending limits because the banking rules were going to be changing very soon and more people were going to be spending money with Dell the way I tried to. They had to implement a process to start accepting debit cards, which had required a rush overnight charge from their merchant bank, and my purchase was their test case. She had me check my credit union, who showed the funds were officially a purchase and not just an authorization hold. Then she called the loading dock and made sure my computer was on a truck. Within 10 minutes, I had an email with a tracking number. Too long didn't read, the reason Dell takes debit cards. To this day, I'm exactly the same way, of religiously checking tracking updates on my orders, like to an unhealthy extent. Also, that's really freaking cool that you're basically the reason a small part of history happened. So weird to think debit cards at some point were a new thing. Story 2. Marbles being banned at my elementary school. I vaguely remember the convoluted rules we had for playing marbles in 3rd grade, but one that was written in stone was that if you lost a game, you had to throw away a marble of your own. This often drew a crowd of participants eager to get their tiny hands on a free marble. One day I lost a game and was forced to throw a marble away. We called this scrambling, and stupidly agreed to offer up as an ante for the game we prized Boulder, a heavy marble with intricately woven colors that was about the size of a golf ball. When it was time to throw it away, a large crowd of kids had gathered, impatiently jeering me to toss it and start the melee. I took one last look at my boulder and in a surge of 8-year-old rage, launched it with all my strength. I still remember it gleaming against the deep blue skies it left my hand. It's called, flew over the group's head, their mouths agape in amazement. It flew until it struck some poor blonde kid in the head who was just walking along kicking dandelions, totally oblivious to the incoming projectile. It hit him hard. To this day, I still recall the way his head snapped back in Zapruder-like fashion. He dropped instantly, like a bag of old socks. We all scattered to the 4 corners of the playground as teachers ran to his side. The following day, a letter was sent home to every parent banning all marbles. Poor Blondie McMarblehead, forgot his name. This was about 32 years ago. Was off school for about a week. Imagine just enjoying your day as a kid, kicking some flowers, and then getting one-tapped by a marble out of nowhere. Story 3. Not taking shelter while a tornado is on the ground is considered insubordination. I was working late to meet some deadlines and my job allows flex time. So basically I can work up to 4 hours extra, spread out over the week, and bail 4 hours early on another day, as long as it's the same pay period and arrange it in advance. I had to get the stuff in before deadline or I could not leave early the next day. So I was working extra hard because I had a doctor appointment coming up. It was like 6:30 p.m. when the sirens go off. There may be 20 of us still in the building and people go into the stairway. A few people just go home. So tell a coworker I'm not going to seek shelter and I'll be working. Cool, no problem. While I'm working around 7 p.m., the sirens are going off again, and there's a dude coming from the tech department making sure everyone seeks shelter. I don't recognize him, but whatever. We go through tech people like no one's business. He tells me to seek shelter. Say unless it's in the handbook, I'm not having work to do. We have a long stare. He says something about the tornado being X far away, and I'm like, I saw it earlier out the other window. It's just a baby one. Won't even break glass, and it's not heading this way. He seeks shelter. See him leave around 8 p.m., and he says something along the lines of, looks was right, about handbook and tornado being small, but it was a giant legal risk if it had been wrong. Found out the next day the dude was the CFO. He had the handbook amended so anyone who left the building or didn't seek shelter would be considered insubordinate. Sounds to me like he was just salty about being proven wrong. But also you should definitely seek some shelter during a tornado. Story 4. During the annual canned food drive at my high school, you can bring ramen noodles, but they no longer count towards the total donated for the competition between the classes. This rule is from when I was a junior. They did all sorts of various competitions between the classes, and of course the seniors always won nearly everything. Well, during the food drive, the juniors concocted a plan to win the event. Instead of bringing in food, we would collect money and a handful of people would hold it all until near the end. It would look like we were losing because our total would be low, but then on the last day, they'd bring in a huge supply and we'd surprise them with the win. They wouldn't know how well we were actually doing until it was too late to do anything about it. I wasn't one of the money people, but a couple of them were friends of mine. The plan was to buy as much food as they could with the money they collected. So naturally, they bought ramen noodles because it's the cheapest thing in the store. I didn't know how much money they had, but I think they must have gotten special order shipments in. On the last day of the drive when I came in, there was a room full of pallets of noodles stacked 5 feet high. I was completely blown away. It was an insane amount of ramen. Based on the number of items brought in, we had like double the sophomores and seniors combined. It was nuts. That must have been such a satisfying win, and the faces on the seniors were probably hilarious thinking they had won. I can definitely see why it's a rule now, but god, that must have been hilarious. Story 5. In my sophomore year of high school, during the short World War I unit, the sophomore history teachers had an event where we went out to the football field and played one flag capture using dodgeball rules. One team had the flag and had trenches made of football training equipment, and the other team had to charge across no man's land and touch the flag to win. Occasionally, the teachers would call out a gas attack, and everyone would have to don paper bag gas masks, or they were out. I had the genius plan of charging the main trench directly without a dodgeball to try to neutralize it to help my team. I handed my ball to a classmate and instead wielded a cardboard trench shovel I made that morning, and then put on my gas mask ahead of time. When it was time to go over the top, I barreled towards the main trench. I miraculously was never hit on my way to it, and slammed into that thing with all my might, taking it down, knocking a couple other kids over, and knocking myself out for a few seconds in the process. The teachers thought it was hilarious, but they quickly had to implement a no trench busting rule after someone tried to replicate my antics during the next round. Unfortunately, as far as I'm aware, that was the last year they did that event. That sounds like the best event ever. I would have loved to do that. That sounds so freaking cool. I hope you guys were nice to that history teacher, because seriously, I can't say this enough. That is so freaking cool. Story 6. Not me, but someone I worked security with at the 920 Summit. Long story short, we were screeners at the entrance. Our x-ray machine, like the one you'd see at the airport, with a treadmill type bib pulling bins through some hanging rubber guards into the x-ray, was a hassle. See, the issue was, most delegates had very little to put through. A watch, a belt, a wallet, the odd item here and there. The curtains were pretty stiff. So the issue was, with only these light items in the bin, it could never get through the curtains. Their weight was greater, so it just spun on the treadmill stuck before them. One of the geniuses on the team next to me came up with a solution. We shall take 6 water bottles and tape them together in a bowling pin style triangle with black duct tape. This will weigh down the bin so we can get through. And must admit, it worked. Like twice. Until the next delegate mistook it for a bomb and pictured it. 6 bottles with no labels and some fluid in them black taped together. The RCMP got involved. It was a whole scene. No custom MacGyver weights are to be used by screeners any longer. Oh god, yeah, I can definitely picture that. Although it might have been a little terrifying at first, I bet everyone had a pretty good laugh at that afterwards. Story 7. In elementary school, we played wall ball, which I'm sure has all sorts of names and variations. 2 players and a red rubber inflatable ball. There would usually be a line next to the wall for who plays next. If you were next, you were the ref, which didn't consist of much, but sometimes you had to determine if a ball bounced before it hit the wall or not. Hitting the wall without a bounce first was bad. I think it was called an ace. I didn't like standing next to the wall, so I invented ringside ref and would stand between the players to get a better view. Years later in high school, I found out that the kids at elementary school were still using my rule. Maybe it spread to other schools. I have no idea. Story 8. Not really a single rule, but more of a full restructuring. When I worked as a nurse, there were a lot of things going on that were pretty shady. Corners being cut, procedures not being followed, and such. A few colleagues went to the board to complain. As we were finishing the meeting, the higher-ups told us that we opened Pandora's box and that they were appalled. Left shortly after, but in the meantime, they had put a team in place to work on the issues. And it was a shish show for a while. Yeah, but I bet that shish show was worth getting all that shady stuff out of the way. Good for you guys. Story 9. In my first year of university, I took philosophy as an elective, and our professor said on the first day that he was easygoing and didn't mind if assignments were late and wouldn't dock points. I turned all 8 papers he assigned into him the day of our final exam. True to his word, he graded them all fairly and didn't deduct points for lateness. I took a class with him the next year, and on the first day he said that due to past events, he'd accept a late assignment only with a note from a doctor, or if someone died while making eye contact with me. Oh man, he done ruined it for everyone. That's pretty freaking hilarious though, that he made eye contact with you. If I were you, I might have just dropped out after that. Story 10. In college, we had a shuttle van that would carry you from your dorm to your car after dark. I got dropped off at my car and crossed in front of the van. The shuttle owner was on his phone, not paying attention, and started to drive. Felt the hood and grill start pushing into my shoulder and hip, and was able to scream and flail to get his attention before he ran me over. Now they have to go both ways down each row of cars in the parking lots to only let people out of the passenger side. Or I mean, they could just make the driver pay attention. Story 11. Bus drivers should check the seats on the bus for sleeping children before locking them and leaving them in the parking garage. My daughter falls asleep on the bus every day. If I don't see the driver when she comes around at her designated time, I I wait 20 minutes and she comes back with my kid. It's a thing now, and we all know our routines for it, including the kids who normally wake her up on the bus. The first time the bus kept driving off with her followed the bus in my car. Almost lost my mind. I thought she had forgotten my kid. Story 12. In 8th grade, we had an essay question on a social studies test that read something like this. Imagine you were a miner during the gold rush. What would your life be like? Detail your day-to-day life in a diary entry below. I wrote mine to actually sound like it was written by someone from that time period. Next time we had a diary entry style essay question, I saw in the directions. Make sure to write your essay using clear and proper English. I never followed that rule, and the teacher never cared enough to deduct points. And why would they have even made it a rule? Maybe it wasn't for you and there was just some kid really messing up with her English. Story 13. So my company pays for my food when I travel, which is awesome. I was fairly new to the job at the time, so I went to a lovely Nordic restaurant for brunch in Oregon. I ended up getting drunk on some delicious mimosas, paid for on a separate tab, and $25 worth of food. I was drunk and my server was awesome. I ended up tipping him 100%. A couple days later, my boss called me and asked me, why did you tip $25? Shortly after that, the company sent out an email to everyone with a strict 20% tip policy. A 100% tip was only $25? That seems kind of low, and not enough for a reaction like that from the boss. Story 14. A card game called ERS, Egyptian Rat Screw. No idea why it's called that. Essentially, it's like Slapjack where you have to get to the pile first. Well, because I am bomb at that game, no one would play with me without a few handicaps. So to circumvent my cat-like reflexes, they made a rule to touch your forehead before slapping the deck or you don't get the cards. This led to a lot of full-on smacking yourself in the face really hard before they gave up on that rule. Plus, I still won, minus a few brain cells. Okay, but Egyptian Rat Screw is the best name for a game ever. Story 15. Isn't really a rule, but the action happened when I was 9. The line at the post office in my neighborhood was very long, sometimes 2 hours long, and didn't have a water cooler. I asked my dad naively why there wasn't a water cooler for the elders. We sent them to a mall and they put the water cooler there the next week. Story 16. At Boy Scout summer camp as a scoutmaster. No campfire flames higher than 24 inches. Turns out that if you make a 5-foot tower out of only the 1/4 dowels from small American flags, you get a straight and narrow column of flame about 30 feet high. Was the Clark Griswold of Scoutmasters. Love the National Lampoon's reference. Story 17. Gave myself a concussion in a college yoga class by having my mat too close to the mirror ballet bar. It's now a department rule that you can't be next to the mirror while stretching or doing yoga or Pilates. It's been 7 years. Story 18. After having my 2 front teeth replaced, band director. Okay, I never thought I'd have to say this, but wrestling is not allowed in the band room. Story 19. Not a rule, but a bunch of signs were put up in front of my school because I got hit by a car in the crosswalk. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe for more videos to come, or else this spider will be in your bed tonight.